Thank you, Madam Chair and members. My name is Amy O'Gorman Jenkins, and I'm here on behalf of the California Cannabis Operators Association, the largest cannabis trade association in California. We represent hundreds of licensed operators across the supply chain, serving over half the state's population. Our members are farmers, manufacturers, retailers, and distributors. They are job creators, union employers, community leaders, and they are barely hanging on. I'm here today to set the record straight. The legal cannabis industry in California is not growing or thriving. And unless we take urgent corrective action, starting with halting the excise tax increase, and I appreciate that you will have a hearing on that later in the year, we risk watching industry collapse altogether. Let me be clear, I do appreciate some of the recommendations provided in the report. However, we would argue that it is a very optimistic view. It talks about increased biomass and wholesale prices, and yet it glosses over the harsh realities facing individual businesses. Let me give you some numbers. Since 2021, legal cannabis sales have dropped by more than $1.1 billion, a 19% decline. Excise tax revenue has fallen nearly 13%, or $88 million. 12,600 cannabis jobs were lost in 2022, followed by another 5,000 in 2023, and we are awaiting data on 2024. Over 7,100 cultivation licenses have vanished. 60% of manufacturing licenses, approximately 1,000 licenses, which were brands that once fueled product innovation and patient and consumer choice, have vanished. 21% of cannabis storefronts have abandoned their licenses, leaving just 1,200 licensed shops, many of which are teetering on the edge of insolvency. And if some of you read the San Francisco Chronicle today, you would also know that the state's oldest dispensary chain, pulling in $100 million a year in revenue, went into receivership today, raising the question, if a company of that scale and history can't survive, can anyone? This is not about market consolidation. It is about a market failure. And now, despite all of this, we're staring down a more than 25% scheduled tax increase. This isn't just bad timing, it's policy malpractice. Even a modest 10% drop in legal sales, meaning consumers would leave the legal market due to an increase, would result in a net revenue loss to the state of more than $13 million. Raising taxes on a declining industry is both economically reckless and morally indefensible. When Michigan, a state with 1/4 of our population, is now outselling California in its regulated market, it is not because they grow better weed. It's because they've embraced sensible tax policy, broad legal retail access, and an enforcement scheme that is well-funded and works. Meanwhile, here in California, consumers are fleeing the regulated market to unlicensed retailers, online shops, and delivery services offering cheaper, untested, untaxed products. Legal operators are being outcompeted by the illicit market, which produces an estimated 11.4 million pounds, as noted in the economic report. The report also indicates that an estimated 9 million pounds of that illicit cannabis is leaving the state, fueling illegal markets across the country. If priced similarly to licensed cannabis, this would represent a $37 billion shadow market, nearly 8 times larger than California's $4.7 billion in legal sales. And it was noted previously, but let me state it again. It is critically important to mention that the same legal businesses foot the bill for the entire state regulatory framework, including enforcement, through their licensing fees. No general fund dollars are used, and that is not sustainable. And let's not forget hemp-derived intoxicants, often falsely labeled as legal cannabis, that continue to flood the market at an alarming rate, skirting all safety and tax regulations while undercutting compliant businesses. We support a legal, well-regulated marketplace. It's essential to public health and safety. But policies taxing our businesses while allowing illegal operators to thrive undermine that vision every day. Let's not forget the will of the voters. Prop 64 wasn't just about legalizing cannabis. It was about displacing the illicit market. The initiative is crystal clear. The intents and purposes section referenced no fewer than 5 times states, it is the intent of the people in enacting this act to take marijuana production and sales out of the hands of the illegal market, to tax the growth and sale of marijuana in a way that drives out the illicit market, to prevent illegal production and distribution of marijuana, and to prevent the illegal diversion of marijuana from California to other states or countries or to the illegal market. We are not achieving that vision. In fact, the opposite is happening. If we want to honor the will of California voters, we need to enact policy that actually draws consumers to the regulated market, not drive them away from it. So we need 3 things, and some of it was referenced in the economic report, which we appreciate. First and foremost, we need the legislature to pass AB 564 or an iteration of that bill, which we are proud to co-sponsor. This would repeal the automatic excise tax increase that is scheduled on July 1st. We also must crack down on illicit THC products disguised as hemp. These products are not harmless, low THC hemp alternatives. Many are high-potency intoxicants sold in gas stations, online, and smoke shops without age verification, testing, or taxes, and they account for as much as 60% of the market, according to the state's own report. We need aggressive enforcement and clear regulatory authority to remove these products from the unregulated marketplace and to ensure that any intoxicating THC product, regardless of its source, is treated like cannabis under state law. Last, we must expand retail access to support licensees. Right now, 57% of California cities and counties still ban cannabis retail. That means millions of consumers have no access to safe, legal cannabis. If we're truly serious about transitioning consumers from the illicit to the legal market, we must increase legal retail access and remove local barriers. At the same time, we must support licensees by reducing operational costs and creating pathways for long-term sustainability. Madam Chair and members, we're not asking for a bailout, we're asking for a fighting chance. We all know Prop 64's intent was to create a safe, taxed, and regulated cannabis marketplace that works for California. But today, more than 7 years later, that promise remains unfulfilled. Let's fix the tax structure, enforce the law, and restore integrity to the marketplace. And let's make sure California remains the national leader in cannabis, not just in policy, but practice. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you. Any comments from the Department of Finance?
Charlene Manning, Department of Finance. No comments at this time.
LAO? Assembly Member One? Right, a lot of information, and some of this we heard in a budget committee as well, and a lot to digest. On the expanding retail access, you mentioned 60% of local municipalities have said no to cannabis, and I have seen that in Orange County. I think there's only maybe 2, I'm not sure how many, but out of 34 cities, maybe 2 or 3 that have said yes. What are your ideas on expanding this? Because I know maybe a few years ago, there was a potential bill that was brought forward. Well, it actually wasn't brought forward, but it was discussed about if a municipality had over 51%, I think, of voters that supported Prop 64, that in essence, they'd be able to move forward without the local council. Is there any thoughts of bringing something like that back? Is there what's going on?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We actually, as an industry, are engaging in those discussions. So that was a Ting bill, and we were pleased to see that bill move through the Assembly with a lot of support from Assembly members. It did ultimately stall, and it stalled really at that time because the local government associations and individual cities and counties, it said they did not have sufficient time. They needed more time to stand up their retail programs. Well, I think at that time, and it's been a while, but I want to say we were looking around 40 45% of cities and counties were allowing retail. That has not increased exponentially. We're not seeing additional jurisdictions coming on board. The statistic right now is 57%, and this is many years later. We're now 7 years into the program. So to your question, yes, the industry is looking very closely at that concept once again, and we are beginning to engage in those discussions with our legislators, keeping close attention to what legislative districts would be most affected, because obviously a bill like that will draw some opposition, but I think it's certainly something worth exploring, and the industry is taking it very seriously.
And for the cities that have said yes to cannabis, some of them, am I correct, have added additional taxes on to their own in addition to the state.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So you've said yes, but now you're adding more and more.
So that's a great question. What I'll say is a lot of jurisdictions, actually all jurisdictions, apply a tax on retail. It's usually a gross receipts tax. However, many jurisdictions have actually moved to reduce their local taxes because they are seeing a reduction in revenues. As I indicated, that significant decline since 2021, which is about 19% in state excise tax, also applies locally. So the locals are seeing the impact of their taxes. And so there are many jurisdictions that have sought to provide relief. And you're seeing that in all aspects of the supply chain, whether it's cultivation, distribution, manufacturing. But you are right. The combined tax rate can be extremely high. The average is about 35%.
And then there's the false narrative that many cities and elected officials are sticking to, which is if we say no to cannabis in our city, that it doesn't exist, when we clearly see that it is thriving, and that is repeated over and over. And I've seen it in Fullerton, where people literally have said, why don't you have it in your area? And it's actually was 2 blocks away. And then when you shut them down, as we know, they pop right back up because local government cannot spend all day enforcing this, although they do some. All right. With that, no questions up here. We'll hear from the public.
Hey again, Kristen Heidelbach, UFCW. Oops, sorry. Wow.
There you go.
Everyone's awake now. Western States Council, just want to echo Amy's comments. Just a few things. I want to stress that the illicit hemp industry, while we're grateful for the governor's action there and the emergency rulemaking, so that any intoxicating hemp product is really illegal. But the problem is that a lot of consumers don't quite understand that, and we're playing whack-a-mole. They just look at it as a tax break. Oh, this one shop gave me a tax break. And so there's a consumer disconnect. But I also think that the enforcement, and UFCW, we led on this a few years back where we tried to get additional funding for the AG's EPIC program, which is the eradication prevention of illicit cannabis. I think that it takes a multiple agency effort and local efforts in order to really combat the problem. So thank you.
Thank you.
If we can focus for a second on 24% of the market, which is LA City, there are almost 4,000 competitors that sell illicit hemp products. There are 430 available licenses. Only 200 of them are currently active, and 200 have given up their licenses. This is not just about access. This is about competition. There is not lines out people's doors. Let's also be clear that 82% of those LA retailers are behind on their local taxes, and we have $1.6 billion in unpaid state taxes. This is not just about a competition. We actually have to make money to pay off the debt to even get to a sustainable level. So we need to really look at how are these businesses not only going to survive, but how are they going to thrive enough to pay back all the debt that they currently owe.
Thank you.
Chair and members, Alicia Priego here on behalf of Kiva Brands, which is one of the few remaining manufacturers in California. Just wanted to echo our shared concerns as presented by Amy Jenkins with CaCOA. Over the past 3 years, Kiva has had to make employee reductions in order to stay in the state and are looking for ways to continue being in the state. They're a homegrown manufacturer here, and really proud to be a part of the California cannabis culture, but it's no longer sustainable. And so we really want to reinforce the need for urgent action regarding addressing high taxes, enforcement, regulatory costs and burdens, and also increasing access to retail. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. If you look at the news today, we have a constitutional crisis in D.C., we have an economic crisis, and today we're here because we have a cannabis market crisis. It's a great report by the DCC and their economists. I just want to re-emphasize 60% of the market is illegal, unsolicited, and growing. So whether we have continued production, the illicit market, if we don't do something in this legislative session, will continue to grow. I represent Good Farmers, Great Neighbors, which is a trade association based in Santa Barbara County of growers and farmers, and we are 100% behind all the recommendations that are come forth by the legislature. In particular, I want to bring one point. New York State, the governor and legislature just recently passed a state law and signed by the governor that cannabis is now on the list as a crop. And I think that the economists here in this room on the next, if there's an amendment to the report, what would cannabis look like in California if it was a crop and not a commodity? With that, thank you, Madam Chair.
Can you state your name?
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Sam Rodriguez.
All right. Thank you. Seeing nobody else, any last questions? Thank you. We appreciate your testimony. We are going to be moving to item